We are honored today to welcome Colin Campbell. Professor Campbell, the renowned nutritionist and biochemist and author of the China Study, whose recent book is The Future of Nutrition. Also with us today is Dr. Barry Boyd, who is a senior oncologist at the Smilow Cancer Center at Greenwich Hospital. He was also the former nutrition counselor at the Yale School of Medicine and is the author of the Cancer Recovery Program. Human health and the health of our ecosystems are intimately connected. We need biodiversity in both of our diets and in the environment. But chemicals in our modern society are ubiquitous, poisoning us and posing serious risks that we've never seen before. So we've succeeded in defeating nature with pesticides of all kinds, and in the process, we've seriously damaged both our planet and ourselves. Much of this damage is due to animal agriculture. So today we're going to look at ways that we might mitigate some of the harm. Let's begin by looking at pesticides. Now, Barry, you've researched that a great deal.
Yes. Now, I will just say as a little intro, my original plan was to become an ecologist and biologist. And so that's why I went to Cornell, and I ended up getting sidetracked into nutrition, which ended up getting me into medical school and then becoming involved in cancer care and the role of nutrition in cancer outcomes. And while I was doing that, I became very intrigued and concerned about the role of other factors linked to diet. We tend to think of what's in the diet from nutrients, et cetera, but more and more there's a concern about what other things in the environment are playing a role. Because one of my big focuses at Yale is determining causes of cancer causation. And one of those is environmental factors that might be linked to that. And I actually, in the last 3 to 4 years, have been very involved in exploring and even involved as an expert in the role of Roundup as a potential risk factor for cancer. And as you may recall, we tend to forget how ubiquitous pesticides and other organic compounds are environmentally. Many patients are much, much, much more aware of this than cancer doctors, for instance. When I testify about pesticides, or particularly Roundup and cancer, the universal question is, well, why isn't it that the other oncologists don't even raise the question about exposures? It's because it's not part of the way they think. Doctors are trained to think, like much of us, in silos. I have this crazy silo that includes the environment, which many physicians don't, and even more importantly, the role of nutrition in cancer. So I kind of have a much broader perspective on this. And what I discovered was, of course, that the corporate goals of this were very much devoted toward maximizing agricultural output, the use of production, and the very interesting fact about glyphosate, which is the active herbicide in Roundup, is that it was really designed by Monsanto as a way to be accompanied by GMO plant-based products that were essentially glyphosate or Roundup resistant. So they could sell to agricultural, now it's not farmers. I mean, I think we should forget the word farmer and think of giant agricultural industrial complexes with huge farms, which are run by large corporations often. And they could plant these GMO products that were glyphosate or Roundup resistant, spread Roundup to maximize both the control of weeds while allowing the plants, and it's soybean, it's corn, it's wheat. You can cotton many of the huge agricultural complexes that generate these huge acreages, use a lot of these products as a way of assuring that they don't have weeds there. They also use it in a process called desiccation.
Yeah.
At the end, prior to the harvest, where they spray it to allow quick loss of the leafing, so they can harvest it quickly. And it turns out that you and I and all of us have glyphosate or Roundup in our system. The myth is that it's one thing. Glyphosate has many products, and Roundup contains many other what are called non-glyphosate co-formulants that also are toxic. And so this is where they have done everything they can to avoid the acknowledgement that there's risk. So the people that I review are often people who have been exposed to, literally industrial level exposures. People are out there spraying every day, get high levels of exposure to their skin. And what they have said is there is no toxicity. You can drink it. And they don't quite say that, but that's the myth. And therefore, you don't need to wear gloves. You don't need to wear any protective clothing. While one of my toxicology colleagues who does this has said that the people who have developed these products and study them in the field, in their research fields, all wear very heavy protective equipment, PPEs they're called, just like we do now with COVID. But so this is just one example of how the industrialization of agriculture has spread not only the GMOs, which are themselves an issue, but now the use of these herbicides and other products. Now, what's fascinating to me is, where does it go? Well, the most likely source for most people is plant-based foods, because that's where agriculture is spreading all of these contaminants, right?
Well, wait, I have to differ there, because a lot of the pesticides are being sprayed on corn and soy, and most of that is going to feed animals.
And yeah, no, I'm not arguing that. That's
if we
exactly
didn't
right.
have animal agriculture, we would have far less pesticides in our environment, far less pesticides.
Well, I think though, it raises a huge justice issue to me, okay? Because all of us acknowledge the best diet is a plant-based Mediterranean diet with high fruits and vegetables, away from the animal products that you're talking about. The conventional plant-based diet, the Mediterranean diet, high fruits, vegetables, whole grains, which we all acknowledge and all the studies show are really beneficial, had a markedly higher level of pesticides, organic pesticides, than the organic diet, which again exemplifies the importance of organic in the way we manage our plant, our agriculture.
Well, Colin Campbell is the originator of the phrase plant-based diet.
Right.
And I wonder if you would chime in here, Colin, and talk a little bit about your work.
Yeah, well, first, I would agree. Your analysis of the pesticide, big agriculture sort of world is excellent. And the question concerning the toxicity of these compounds is obvious. I mean, something we need to be concerned about. But let me add something, a little different twist to a couple of things. I was, of course, from the farm. I grew up milking cows. And so I was all into eating animal foods. That's what I did in graduate school. My research was that. So for me, it was quite a journey to come from that point of view to the present point of view. But more to the point regarding what Dr. Boyd just talked about, when I was raised, and I earned my way to school, I should say, to college, actually driving a combine, harvesting grain. That was always a bit of a problem in those days. This is pre-pesticide days, pre-herbicide days. And in those times too, we had to, harvest the grain with one of these big self-propelled combines, basically. And sometimes the grain was falling over, and it was this and that, and it was cluttered up with weeds. And so it was a problem. And of course, when Big Ag came around, some 10, 20 years after that, then we had to concern ourselves with producing enough food at a reasonable price for a larger number of people. So Big Ag just happened because of the demand of the humans for the kind of food that they were accustomed to using and wanted to continue. And so we got trapped into a problem of having to live with these chemicals, so the argument goes. And just in order to increase yield 3 or 4 times, in some cases, also to reduce the weed content, if you will, control pests, all that stuff is an obvious concern. The only comment I would like to make about that, though, is that a lot of that grain that's being grown is for cattle. It really is for cattle. And then it raises the question, why do we need to eat so many cattle? basically. So there is a connection. There's a really sort of insidious sort of connection, in the system between our desire to eat this food that's animal based for one thing, and being able to produce that food in an economically, viable way, and do it, unfortunately, with all these chemicals. Now, having said that, and I totally agree with you, Dr. Boyd, on this particular point, those chemicals are worrisome in many ways. But I would suggest at the same time that discussion took place and has been taking place, there's a tendency, there's an offshoot of that argument that I'm concerned about, right from the very beginning. Namely, the point of view arose within, especially the cancer community, of which I've been a part for all these years. It arose that, cancer is primarily caused by these chemicals, these environmental chemicals. And, a lot of people would like to almost believe that just subconsciously. And of course, they can be carcinogenic at times, especially when combined with other practices. That's an issue. But in doing so, that deflected attention away from what really is involved in growing cancer, namely nutrients. And I'm not talking about individual nutrients in this case. That's not where the game plan is. It's actually nutrients working together in a wholesome sort of way, where we really see the big thing. So when we look at, for example, the relationship of cancer occurrence in different societies, with, let's say, these environmental chemicals on the one hand, yes, there's some effect there, versus, let's say, something else. It's the something else. It's the nutritional, the food we eat that really is mostly related to the cancer that occurs at the end of the day. So there was this offshoot of using these chemicals. One was what you just described as very well, but the other is a deflected conversation from the causes that I would suggest really matter, not just in cancer, of course, but in the other degenerative diseases as well. So it's a complicated question.
Yes, it is. One of the things that it involves is protein, and there's a great big discussion about whether we're eating too much protein and certain types of protein. Protein, as I understand it, sort of helps cells to grow. So if you have cancer, doesn't protein also help those cells to grow faster? So you would want perhaps less protein as you're trying to recover.
Actually, there's abundant data, and I know Dr. Campbell has written about this very importantly in relationship. And we get caught up in the carbohydrate fat. The fat hypothesis started it, and then people then switched to low fat, high carb for a while. But they were using a lot of processed foods, and we've neglected the critical importance that dietary protein plays in cell growth. The earliest, and as a biologist, I'm focused on the early cellular mechanisms that trigger growth of cells. And one of them is a complex that is called mTOR. And one of the critical determinants of activation of mTOR, which triggers cell growth, are proteins, particularly essential fatty acids in protein. And we know that there's abundant data on the other side of the coin, which is how do you induce longevity and reduce aging? And there's a whole body of research on, dietary restriction and things that turn off a series of compounds around insulin and insulin-related growth factor. And they've actually looked at this in terms of dietary protein. There's a really interesting series of studies from Europe, where in England, where when women switch from nursing to bottled milk, they discovered one of the features was they really increased the level of protein in the milk, and they found that the children became more likely, when they did an experiment on bottled milk using the same level of protein in the mother's milk versus that in the typical milk that they give, the children who had bottled milk at the higher level of protein were more likely to become obese as children, which starts the ball rolling. We forget that this doesn't start, and even cancers are linked to childhood obesity, early birth and size. For instance, dairy is actually a very important predictor of height in adults. That's why the Dutch are the tallest. And I know that Dr. Campbell has talked a lot about the role of dairy, and dairy plays a big role in height, perhaps through in part IGF. But I think, there are now studies showing that dietary protein levels from multiple studies, particularly animal-based protein is highly predictive of both cardiovascular, cancer, and overall mortality in populations, particularly under the age of 65. Every year I give a lecture at Yale, one on micronutrients and cancer, and I talk about, and Dr. Campbell I know is familiar with this, the famous studies that nobody has ever heard of, because it's nutrition, so nobody knows about it. So every time I describe to people that taking high dose beta carotene if you smoke increases your cancer risk, use of supplements as opposed to diet, they freak out and they say, I've never heard that before. I actually told that to the radiation therapy fellows at Yale when I gave a lecture, and nobody had heard of this. And I said, well, these are landmark studies that anyone who knows about cancer prevention and cancer epidemiology should be familiar with. It just goes out the window. People just don't know about it. They don't pay attention.
Well, the supplement industry is a huge one and makes a lot of money, and very high dosages of nutrients that are probably in small doses and in food useful for us are perhaps dangerous when they're in a high dosage supplement that people are taking. Oh, I need all this B12. B12
Well,
is
that's what those studies showed. They showed that dietary beta carotene or levels of beta carotene in the blood are correlated with lower risk. Now, the problem is it probably is not the beta carotene. It's actually what beta carotene is a marker for, which is a healthy plant-based diet.
Mm-hmm. So you're now totally on the side of a completely plant-based diet.
Oh, I am, absolutely.
You are. Are you completely plant-based in your own diet?
I am almost completely. I am.
Excellent. Okay.
I couldn't add much more to that. You said it really well, Dr. Boyd. That question, that study that you referred to about beta carotene and smoking, that was actually published, as you probably know, in 1981. And it was at a time when I was doing the research at that time, sort of looking at different nutrients, if you will, and how it affected experimental carcinogenesis, et cetera, et cetera. And the beta carotene was shown in that first study that smokers, the heavy smokers who consume more beta carotene in their blood had a lower risk of lung cancer, of all things. A perfect dose-response relationship, really quite amazing, which is, of course, then suggested some researchers too, well, why don't we take the beta carotene, out and put it in a pill? And they did that.
Yes.
They had a study for what was going to be 8 years. It stopped it at 5 years. It was a Norwegian-American study. And what they found was the beta carotene in the blood, yes, as it goes up, lung cancer risk goes down. So beta carotene is good. I agree with you, Dr. Boyd, that it wasn't just the beta carotene, it was the whole diet. But then on the other hand, those taking the beta carotene in a supplement, lo and behold, the cancer went up. So the beta carotene in the food acted differently. And that really had an impact on much of my career. In fact, I was at that time on a National Academy panel that was on the Diet, Nutrition, Cancer panel in the early 80s. And later from that, there was some entrepreneurs wanted to start the vitamin supplement industry in the middle 80s. And they started making claims, the wrong kind of claims. So the Academy asked me to represent them over a 3-year period and challenged some of the claims they were making. So I really got an early lesson, firsthand lesson on this whole story.
But what it did is people who had a precancerous lesion in the lung, it enhanced progression within a short period of time to malignancy. And part of that may have changed gene expression. It's the thing I call the law of unintended consequences. We don't know why, but high doses are not good. And my favorite thing now is we are seeing this in real time now with the use of very high dose B12 also increases lung cancer risk. And people don't listen. I have doctors who get mad at me and swear at me when I say, what are you doing giving people oral and IM B12 because it makes them feel better, because they have no clue that it is potentially, it's a drug when you give it in such, the doses now are in the range of 250 to 500,000% of your daily requirement. Imagine those doses that are easily gotten over the counter as well as through shots by the doctor. And of course, the doctors make money when they give a shot of B12. So I had a patient say, one of the doctors said to me, you don't know what you're talking about. She gives B12 to people who need energy. It's craziness.
B12 is a big controversy, especially among vegetarians. Where should we be getting B12 and how much B12 do we actually need? This is a big question.
We do these, and Dr. Campbell is familiar with the use of what we call large prospective cohort studies to analyze relationship between nutrients and risk. And they took every international cohort and they joined together to analyze levels of B12 in members of their cohort in relationship specifically to lung cancer, because a randomized trial from Norway showed a higher risk of lung cancer in people who took B12. That's a start.
Mhm.
And they found a graded risk of higher B12 in lung cancer. But they did something really neat. It's the newest approach to determining, is it causal or just a coincidence? So they did a thing called Mendelian randomization. They looked specifically at variants of genes that everybody has, but so those variants that were associated with higher levels of B12. And they did this Mendelian randomization in addition, and they showed it was consistently those gene variants that caused you to have higher B12 levels were consistently associated with a high risk of lung cancer.
Mhm.
So that is really additional evidence, but I'll tell you something really very interesting. Everybody is familiar who deals in cancer with a thing called a PET scan. A PET scan takes advantage of glucose dependency of tumors, so that tumors will take up, if they're growing very quickly, they have a thing called tumor reprogramming. Of course, Dr. Campbell will be familiar with people who talk about very low carb diets, right? That's part of that. The idea of lowering the level of glucose. But what they showed is when you put radio labels on glucose, it lights up where the tumor is. You can do exactly the same thing by labeling B12, and you can make a PET scan with B12 that will take it right to the tumor. And there's now studies in people with early stage breast cancer who take B12, it will double their risk of recurrence if you take B12. Why? B12 is essential for DNA synthesis. So tumors, I say glucose is the fuel and B12 is the STP. And why is it that people are mad at me? Doctors know nothing about nutrition. I can't get people to pay attention.
By the way, coming back to the insulin like growth factor that you mentioned before, this may be a somewhat peripheral comment, but that of course is a growth hormone, if you will, causes faster rate of growth, and just very generically, in a sense. It turns out that when we were doing our studies on the effect of animal protein on cancer development, right? It was specific for animal protein, not plant protein, as you know. And then we, at that particular point in time, I was having difficulty really accepting our own research. So I really had to sort of take the pharmacologic sort of argument. Let's find a mechanism, just in case we can find a mechanism that might be amenable to drug treatment. So we were looking at various sensitivity mechanisms to see how this protein actually increases cancer. Every time we looked for a mechanism, we found one. 8 of them were increasing activity, 2 were decreased, but all 10 result in the same endpoint. So it led to a whole fascinating concept that, nutrients have multiple mechanisms and they all turn out to work together almost in harmony. One of those mechanisms is IGF. For animal proteins, there's a higher level of IGF that is synthesized as a result.
Should we explain to our audience what IGF is?
Or insulin-like growth factor. Yeah, sorry,
Okay.
Dr. Boyd here. Feeding more animal protein actually increases the synthesis of this insulin-like growth factor, which in turn exacerbates or promotes the development of cancer, at least experimentally. And of course, you referred to the Dutch studies too, those women there as well. They're the tallest women in the world, have the highest rate of breast cancer. They drink the most dairy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It all kind of hangs together really rather nicely. At least I
always said the one advantage they have over Americans is the bicycle.
I exercise.
The bicycle
Right.
mitigates in adulthood some of the risks of continuous growth and weight gain. And so they're tall, but they're thinner. And of course, you go to Amsterdam, you're more likely to be hit by a bicycle than by a car.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, calcium is another big issue for people, and the milk industry, because it's white, makes us think we need calcium for our bones. And that has been promulgated for years and years and years, of why we must all be drinking milk. A lot of people are allergic to milk. I believe there are whole, I think Oriental people and so forth are more allergic to milk. So it's actually very bad to be giving milk to all the kids. Also, milk has a larger fat molecule, I believe, than human milk. It's designed to grow a big fat cow from a little calf, not to grow a human being from a baby. You know, so I can understand what you're saying about people getting fatter because they're having higher levels of dairy in their diet as children. Where are we going with calcium?
The higher the consumption of dairy, if you will, or the higher the consumption of calcium, the higher the consumption of calcium, the greater the risk for bone fractures, an indicator of osteoporosis, if you will. And of course, then there was another study out of Yale, by the way, in the early 90s, that showed the higher the consumption of animal protein, similarly, the higher the risk of bone fractures. So you put calcium and higher animal protein together in this equation, if you will. Which food provides that? It's dairy.
Yeah. That
So,
was acid. It was, I think, it related to acid load and
Yeah.
excretion of phosphate and the effect on bone thinning by
yes,
having too much acid in the
Mhm.
through the animal protein.
yeah.
So this comes to the very interesting question of, can we prevent ourselves from having cancer by having a diet which does not have animal protein in it? And I'm also including fish here because fish is very controversial. The oceans are in serious, serious trouble, highly polluted with PCBs, which persist in the environment, and with other chemicals, with pesticides and so forth, not to mention that we're overfishing and we're killing our oceans by doing it. But fish, which was once a healthy food, is really very questionable at this point.
It's an example of, as you would say, you are what you eat eats.
Yes.
And that goes for fish because of the aquaculture, and I think, you can have healthy, sustained fish if you are careful about how they're fed, but we feed them with all sorts of, foods, including soy. I mean, so you really extract a lot of the reasons why fish are higher in N3 fatty acids, coupled with the fact that they're very high in pollutants, particularly the higher you go in the tree in terms of, carnivorous versus, like, tuna is a great way to get mercury. And now we're seeing links between PCBs, which are, in the ocean, even though they haven't been around, and the relationship with exposures to that. So I would say, you mentioned about the dairy and the role of lactase.
Well, when we cook food, we often create carcinogens, like potatoes, when they're cooked, can have acrylamide. And, meats in general become more carcinogenic when they're barbecued. I went on a raw foods diet after my chemotherapy. And though the chemotherapy did not knock out the cancer, after the raw foods diet, I had, as you may remember, because you are my doctor, a completely clean CAT scan. And that was 20 years ago. I think it was, going to a totally plant-based and raw diet at that time that really was effective against getting rid of what I still had, which was lymphoma.
I would say to you one thing. You're right. And this is something that reinforces what Dr. Campbell believes. He and I, he was talking about the idea that we focus on the carcinogens in our diet. And yet the effect of the plant-based diet versus animal-based diets, the protein in there is critical. And it's not simply because we're getting, for instance, in meat, carcinogens. It's really the animal-based protein that plays a huge role, not just because, this is Bruce Ames's work, looking at the, carcinogenesis, and he was the one who brought up acrylamide.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him one of the sources of acrylamide is in coffee. And yet coffee is consistently associated with lower risks of diabetes and heart disease and even, longevity. It is really and it's one of the best sources of plant-based phytonutrients. And I'd love to hear what Dr. Campbell has to comment on that, because I've found that the data is pretty consistent and is really good at protecting the liver too.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the cacao bean, if you will, the coffee bean, It's plant-based, obviously, it's loaded with all kinds of good stuff in it. But caffeine has taken a hit for some people. I'm kind of sensitive to the caffeine myself. I like coffee, but so I can't have too much. But on the other hand, the product itself, as you just said, Dr. Boyd, is in fact associated with benefits for people with a risk for heart disease. And I didn't hear the one about cancer. That's a new one for me. Yeah, and I think you said diabetes.
Yes, definitely diabetes. That's the indirect effect on cancer, is through impacting diabetes.
So they've already adjusted for confounding, I guess, and that's pretty clear on that case.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is that, if you think about how we eat foods, we have to digest and metabolize food. But when we make coffee, we grind it up, pour hot water through it, so we elute all of those rich compounds in the coffee. And then when you drink it, it goes right into the portal circulation and bathes the liver. Now, the liver, number one, is a source of oxidative damage from many things. And coffee has been clinically associated, and not just clinically, but in epidemiology studies, consistently associated with lower cirrhosis risk for viral hepatitis, iron overload related hepatitis, which clearly is oxidative damage, alcoholic hepatitis, as well as now fatty liver, which is the disease of the 21st century, fatty liver disease, which is now the leading cause of not only cirrhosis, but cancer. I brought this up to our liver group at Yale, and you know what their response was? Can we isolate it and make it and give it to people? I mean, and it's craziness, right? It's because it's the synergy of all of these antioxidant compounds within coffee that's the secret. It's not one thing. It's not caffeic or chlorogenic acid. It's the combination. It's synergy.
Well, this is our problem with our environment. We don't think in terms of the whole system. We think in terms of monocultures of things.
Reductionism.
Reductionism. Yeah, exactly.
Not holism.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's just that's my favorite at the present time. I'm in favor, in fact, of redefining what nutrition really is. Having to do with the interactive effects of a multitude of nutrients and nutrient-like substances beyond our comprehension. All working together to create the response. Once we get to that point and sort of move away from the reductionist philosophy, the better off we're going to be. And the more convincing it becomes actually to eat basically plant-based foods and stay away from the animal-based foods. That combination just has a very broad effect, as I'm sure you know. And
you have a program that you're offering to people through Cornell, I believe. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Took it over to a nonprofit, to a company owned by Cornell, online course. I took the whole package over to them. We've had that course now online, now under the total umbrella of Cornell, called Plant-Based Nutrition. We've had that package, and we've had about 20,000 graduate physicians going to get CME credits if they want to take it. We've had a good time with that, and now our daughter, as a matter of fact, is now the director. She got her PhD in education, curriculum development. But yeah, thanks for giving me a chance to put a plug. It's a nonprofit.
Yeah.
And we're just trying to spread the word about nutrition. It's very exciting.
So we'll put that in the description. It's a way for people to learn more about nutrition and to get it right. Well, thank you both very much for participating in this program today. Is there anything that you wanted to say that we didn't cover before we close?
The fascinating thing is that just being part of nature, what we're talking about is nature.
Yes.
Somehow, Mother Nature got it right. As long as we eat the right kind of food, a whole breadth of all kinds of plants, kind of staying away from the foods of the animal kingdom, just eat the plants, it has a really far-reaching effect.
Okay, well, thank you both. This was really a very interesting conversation, and I hope it'll be helpful for people.
I do too. Thank you, Dale.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Boyd.
Okay.
Thank you.